All right, this is Math 209 Week 4, Section 11.4. We're going to be solving equations using the quadratic formula. So what does that mean? So basically, anytime we've been solving the equation, right, what we've been trying to do is find where this graph crosses the x-axis, okay? So a lot of the times we've been using Desmos, and you can kind of see exactly where it crosses the x-axis. Now right here, you can see the parabola, and we can see it crosses the x-axis here, which looks like it crosses at -1. But we can't quite see what it crosses there, right? We just can't quite tell where it crosses the x-axis. So that means we can't use Desmos like we would like to. So what we're going to have to do is some other way to find out. And the idea is the quadratic formula is a really cool way to do that. So we're going to write 4x squared plus 9x plus 5 equals 0. Now when we're doing this, A is 4, B is 9, and C is 5, okay? Everything's positive. Now, for the quadratic formula, you have to write this down. You don't need to memorize it. Just write it down in your notes because you're going to need it. And it goes like this. X equals, big old huge fraction, x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. All right? A lot of high schools, when they're teaching this, and their students have to memorize it, they do it with the pop goes the weasel thing. So it's x equals negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So that's how they memorize it, right? So now that you know the formula, you just stick in these numbers wherever you see the letters. So it becomes negative 9 plus or minus the square root of 9 squared minus 4 times 4 times 5 all over 2 times 4. All right? So negative b. So if this was a negative already, negative b becomes positive. So basically this means the opposite of. So since it's 9, it becomes the opposite of 9, which is negative 9. All right? So anyway, now our job is to do this laborious task of simplifying. So this big old huge fraction, negative 9 plus or minus the square root of, this becomes 81 minus, oh, let's see, 81 minus 80 all over 8. And so negative 9 plus or minus the square root of 1 over 8. All right, so that's easy. That becomes equals negative 9 plus or minus 1, because the square root of 1 is saying what times what equals 1. So it's 1 all over 8. So what does this mean? So this means x is equal to negative 9 plus 1 over 8, or x is equal to, and x is equal to negative 9 minus 1 over 8. So negative 9 plus 1 is negative 8, and negative 8 over 8 is 1. So this is x is equal to 1. And over here, you've got, this becomes x is equal to negative 10 over 8. Which really is negative 5 over 4. All right, so here's your answer, and here is your answer. Now check out all the work that we have to do, all the steps that you have to do in order to get this answer. It's a lot of work. You got the equation, you've got the original equation, then you've got the quadratic formula, then you have to fill it in, and then you just have to start simplifying it until you break it apart into two separate pieces. And so again, now you'll notice x equals negative 1 and negative 5/4. So if we go up here and look at our graph, yep, sure enough, we knew x is equal to -1. It was this guy we didn't know, and it turns out it's -5/4. We never would have guessed that. We never would have guessed that. But the quadratic formula tells us beyond a shadow of a doubt that's what it is. So what you're going to do is you're going to type in no particular order, -1, -5/4. Right? That's what you're going to do. You are not, don't put it in parentheses because it's not an ordered pair. You're just supposed to list out your answers with commas. All right, so here we've got this equation, and you know, it says to use the quadratic formula, but really it doesn't hurt to try and type this into Desmos to see if it works. Now you're not going to do the 0 equals 0. You're just going to type in y is equal to and not have that part. So that's what you're going to type into the equation with Desmos. Now when you do that, you get this really, you'll notice, it says y is equal to. And then when you do, you get this really cool, crazy graph. And actually, at first I couldn't see it because you had to zoom out. You'll notice I had to zoom out all the way to 100 here. So it was pretty crazy, and I had to just kind of keep zooming and squeezing and pulling and pinching on my iPad. And eventually I saw that you can see that right here, it looks like it intersects at -4. And way over here, it looks like it intersects at 8. So it looks like our answers are -4 and 8. All right, so, but just to be sure, let's take a look. So we're going to use that quadratic formula. And you'll notice I've got the equation already written right here. And so you remember the formula. And the formula is x equals -b, x equals -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. All right, and so there we go. So now it's time for us to start substituting. So where you see each letter, you replace it with a number. Now I'm going to shout out here to this number, -b. Well, b is already negative, so it becomes +4. That's the important part right here, and you fill in everything else. So you might need to pause to look at the equation and look how I substituted all the values. And now it's time to just start simplifying. So -4 squared is 16, and then 4 times 1 times -32 becomes +128 because it's minus, so it's 128 all over 2. And then we're going to keep going here, and then we're going to keep going, and so 16 plus 128 is 144. So now you've got 4 plus or minus the square root of 144 over 2. And now the cool thing is the square root of 144, that's 12. All right, so there we go. It's 12, so it becomes 4 plus or minus 12 all over 2. Now this means we now break it up into 2 separate problems, right? So here's our 2 separate problems. This says 4 plus 12 over 2, and this is 4 minus 12 over 2. And when you simplify these, you end up with, let's see, this is 4 plus 12 is 16 divided by 2 is 8. 4 minus 12 is -8. Divided by 2 is -4. And sure enough, those were the 2 answers that Desmos was predicting way up here, -4 and 8. And the order doesn't matter. Down here I wrote 8 and -4, so it doesn't matter. So what are you going to do up here in your solutions? You're going to put, what is it, 8 and -4. All right, so we've already demonstrated that Desmos, on this one, I didn't demonstrate it, I did it offline here, that Desmos is just not going to work for us. It gives us definitely some fractions, and we don't like that. We can't, you can't estimate with those fractions. So we're actually going to have to use the quadratic equation, quadratic formula. So that's a is equal to 9, b is equal to -7, and c is equal to -3. The quadratic formula, x equals -b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And then So now we're just going to start substituting. So we end up with 7 plus or minus the square root of negative 7 squared minus 4 times 9 times negative 3 all over 2 times 9. All right, so you might need to pause the video to make sure you understand how I took these numbers, substituted it into this formula to get this. And then I'm going to start the simplifying process. So you get 7 plus or minus the square root of, this becomes 49, and this is going to be plus, and I don't know what 9, let's see, 9 times 12. So I'm going to have to go over here and I'm going to have to do 9 times 12, and I get 108. All right, so it's 108. So this becomes plus 108 all over 18. So now we're going to add inside that square root, so it becomes 7 plus or minus the square root of, and so that's 157 it looks like. All right, all over 18. Now, I'm not sure if 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, I don't know if 157 factors at all. So I'm going to leave it like that. 157 might factor, but I'm not entirely sure. So this becomes your two equations. So it's x equals 7 plus the square root of 157 over 18, and x equals 7 minus the square root of 157 over 18. And there are your two answers. All right, so we're going to solve, and basically remember, when you're solving, you're trying to figure out where that parabola crosses the x-axis. So we're going to use that, and we're going to type that into Desmos, and remember, you're not going to type in the equals 0. You're going to type in, that goes away, and you're going to type in y equals, and this is what you're going to type in. So when you type that into Desmos, you'll see what you get. It took a little while for me to kind of use these symbols over here, these plus and minus and the zoom and all that sort of stuff to get the screen the way I wanted it. But you can see the parabola doesn't exactly look like it crosses the x-axis at all, in which case the answer is going to be there is no solution. And it looks like the answer is going to be B. There is no real solution. So let's see what that looks like when you're doing the quadratic formula. So our quadratic equation here, our equation is negative 8x squared plus 3x minus 1. So A is negative 8, B is 3, and C is negative 1. And so now we're ready to do that quadratic formula. So x equals negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And so now we could start substituting. So you get negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 3 squared minus 4 times negative 8 times negative 1 all over 2 times negative 8. All right, so now we just have to start simplifying. So x equals, and so this is going to be negative 3 plus or minus the square root of, this becomes 9, and this is going to be minus 32, because 4 times negative 8 times negative 1, that's positive 32, so it's going to be minus 32. So 9 minus 32 all over negative 16. And so simplifying further, you get negative 3 plus or minus the square root of, and this becomes negative 23 over negative 16. And right here, you are never allowed to have the square root of a negative number. Why is that? Because if you think about what does a square root of negative 23 mean? What does the square root of negative 23 mean? It means find something that times by itself equals negative 23. Well, there's no way you can have a number times itself to equal a negative. That is an impossible situation. So this right here makes it impossible. So that tells us that Desmos was correct. that there is no real solutions. It means the graph never actually crosses the x-axis. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to graph this into Desmos to see where it crosses the x-axis, because that's what it means to solve. And so when we do that, we're going to graph it, and you'll notice we don't do the 0, we do y equals. And then over here, you'll notice it looks like the parabola crosses at 1/2. All right, we need fractions, not decimals. So it looks like x is equal to 1/2. So let's take a look to see how the quadratic formula does it. So we've got 32x squared minus 32x plus 8. So you've got a is equal to 32, you've got b is equal to negative 32, and you've got c is equal to 8. And so now our equation x equals negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And so now we're going to substitute. So you get x is equal to 32 plus or minus the square root of negative 32 squared minus 4 times 32 times 4ac times 8. Goodness gracious, I'm definitely going to be needing a calculator here. And then down here it's going to be 2 times 32. All right, so busting out my calculator, we are definitely, oops, I accidentally pulled out my camera. Don't need the camera. So what are we going to do? We're going to get x equals, so that 32 just sits here. We don't need him quite yet. But square root of, now first thing we need to do is do negative 32 times negative 32. I get 1024 minus. Now I need to multiply 4 times 32 times 8. So that's 4 times 32 times 8. And that gives me 1024 all over 64. All right. And so simplifying that even further, you get x is equal to, and that 32 is still sitting here. This is going to be plus or minus, and this is the square root of 0. Well, the square root of 0 is 0. We don't need this anymore. So that goes away, and we get x is equal to 32 over 64, which is equal to 1/2. So there's our answer. So it turns out Desmos told us the truth, that x is a half. It is equal to half, and so that's what you're going to put into your answer, that x is 1/2, because we wanted a fraction. A lot of work. Look at all that. Jeez Louise. So Desmos is not going to work on this one. We're actually going to have to do the work. But you'll notice it isn't already in the format that we want. So we're going to have to do some prep work. So first we're going to have to use the distributive property to get it into the form that we want. So we're going to multiply by 2x. So this becomes 2x squared minus 14x is equal to 5. But then we're going to subtract both sides by 5. And that gives us 2x squared minus 14x minus 5 equals 0. Now it's in the format that we need it. We are now officially ready to start doing the quadratic formula. All right, and so here we are. So x equals negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And so what is that? So x equals becomes positive 14 plus or minus the square root of negative 14 squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 5 all over 2 times 2. So I'm going pretty fast, so you might need to pause the video to make sure you understand what the heck I'm doing here. So we've got 14 plus or minus the square root of, now 14 times 14, actually negative 14 times negative 14 is positive 196, and then this is going to be plus 40. And because it says minus, But 4 times 2 times negative 5 is negative 40, so minus a negative 40 is plus 40 over 4. All right, and so continuing to simplify, you got x is equal to, so it's 14 plus or minus the square root of. Now 196 plus 40 is 236 over 4. And so continuing to simplify, so you got x is equal to, and then it's going to be 14 plus or minus. Now, we need to go on scratch paper, and we need to see if we can simplify the square root of 236. So here's the square root of 236, and we're going to take that 236 and we're going to factor it. It's 118. This is a 2, so that's going to be 59, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. And then 59 is prime, I think. And so we can see that 236 is 2 times 2 times 59. So what that means, over 4. So what that means, x equals, so you got 14 plus or minus. It says since there's no number there, it's a 2. So you circle 2 2's, take it, cross it off, and write 1 down. So we're left with the square root of 59 inside. So that becomes 2 times the square root of 59 over 4. And so now this is where it breaks up into 2. So you've got x is equal to 14 plus 2 root 59 over 4. And then over here you got x is equal to 14 minus 2 root 59 over 4. But we're not done, because these can both be simplified. Since 14, 2, and 4 are all divisible by 2, you cross them out, you divide them by 2. So you get 7, 1, and 2. So this answer becomes x is equal to 7 plus 1 root 59 over 2. And you do the same thing over here. This is a 7, 1, and a 2. You divide them each by 2. If they were all divisible by 3, you would have crossed them off and divide them by 3. And so we end up with these as our 2 answers. That is what you're going to type into all the way. Oh my gosh, look at all this work. All the way, all the way, all the way. You're going to type those 2 answers right here. All right, so we've got this another quadratic formula, equation. We're going to use the quadratic formula. Now, I've already typed this into Desmos. It doesn't give me whole number answers, so I've ruled out Desmos as giving me, being the tool to use. So we're going to use the quadratic formula. And so when I copy down the formula, I get A is 5/6, B is -1, and C is negative 12/5. And so now we're going to write that formula. X is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So now we're going to actually start filling stuff in. So x equals, so that becomes 1 plus or minus the square root of -1 squared minus 4 times 5/6 times -12/5. So goodness gracious. All over 2 times 5/6. All right. So now it's just this god-awful, big, long, lots of work to do, kind of a simplifying. So you got 1 plus or minus the square root of. So this becomes 1. Now, I'm going to try and speed things along a little bit here, and I'm going to do a little bit of canceling out. Whoa. All right, so just looking at this portion right here, I see that the 5 cancels with the 5. I see that the 6 cancels with the 12, making it a 2. So it's actually, it becomes a -2. And so what does this end up? This ends up with 4 times 1 times -2, because the denominators all disappear. So it becomes 4 times 1 times -2. So that's -8. But we have a minus over here, so it becomes +8. So all of that work becomes +8 all over, And then this guy right here, the 2 cancels with the 6, so the 6 becomes a 3 and the 2 becomes a 1. So that becomes 5/3 down in the denominator. All right, so now we're still going, still got to go. So we've got x is equal to 1 plus or minus the square root of 9 over 5/3. All right, and so we know that the square root of 9 is 3. So this becomes x equals 1 plus 3 over 5/3, and x equals 1 minus 3 over 5/3. So now we're going to keep going. So this becomes 4 divided by 5/3. So 4 divided by 5/3, you're just going to have to trust me on this. Well, no, 4 divided by 5/3. So what does that mean you're going to have to do? It means over here on scratch paper, you're going to have to do 4 divided by 5/3, which is 4 over 1 times 3 over 5, so that becomes 12/5. So this whole thing right here, x equals 12/5. There's your answer right there. Now we're going to have to go back up and focus on this guy for a little bit. So this guy is x equals -2 over 5/3. So now we have to do a little scratch work. So our scratch work is -2 over 1 divided by 5/3. So that's -2 over 1 times 3 over 5. So that's -6/5. So this guy, x is equal to -6/5. And there are our 2 solutions right here, the 2 places that our graph crosses over that x-axis. All right, I already ruled out Desmos. Desmos doesn't work on this one. It gives us some decimals, and we don't need decimals, we need fractions. So we have to use the quadratic formula. So -3x squared plus 10x minus 4. So A is -3, B is 10, and C is -4. So now we've got x equals -b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And so now we're going to start our substituting. So you get -10 plus or minus the square root of, it's going to be 10 squared minus 4 times -3 times -4 all over 2 times -3. So now we just begin the process of simplifying. So you get x is equal to, how about -10 plus or minus the square root of, so this becomes 100, and then this becomes, let's see, 12 times 4 is 48, so this becomes minus 48 over -6. Feel free to pause to make sure you understand how I'm making these connections here. And so now you get x is equal to, and you've got -10 plus or minus the square root of, and this is 52 over -6. And so now we need to simplify square root of 52. So I'm going to go over here on scratch paper, and I'm going to think about 52. And well, 52 is 2 times 26, which is 2 times 13. So 52 is 2 times 2 times 13. So x is equal to -10 plus or minus the square root of 2 times 2 times 13 over -6. And so remember what that means. That means you're going to, well, let's write this down. So x equals -10 plus or minus, and then here you're going to circle 2 2's, cross them off, write one down, and write whatever you have left over, root 13 over -6. All right, so there is our work so far. So now we've got to split it up, and we have x is equal to -10 plus 2 root 13 over -6. And then over here we have x is equal to -10 minus 2 root 13 over -6. All right, so each of these can be simplified. Starting with this one, 10, 2, and 6 are all divisible by 2. So you end up getting negative 5, 1, and negative 3. So that becomes x is equal to negative 5 plus 1 root 13 over negative 3. And in the same way, negative 10, 2, and negative 6 are all divisible by 2. So you get negative 5, 1, and negative 3. So you end up getting x is equal to negative 5 minus 1 root 13 over negative 3. So you've got these two solutions right there. And that's, you got to type, you're not going to type in the x's. You're actually just going to type this number, comma, this number. No parentheses. Just this number, comma, this number. All right. We've ruled out Desmos. So we're going to do x squared minus 2x minus 10. So a is 1, b is negative 2, and c is negative 10. So now we're going to do that formula. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So now we've got x equals, and then negative b becomes 2 plus or minus the square root of negative 2 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 10 all over 2 times 1. Alright, so doing some more simplifying, you get x is equal to 2 plus or minus the square root of 4, and then this is plus 40 all over 2. Yeah, that's right. 2ac, yeah. And so now we're going to keep going. So you got x is equal to 2 plus or minus the square root of 44 over 2. And we know that 44 is 4 times 11, which is 2 times 2 times 11. So this becomes x is equal to 2 plus or minus the square root of 2 times 2 times 11 over 2. And so simplifying, x is equal to 2 plus or minus, and we see, circle 2 2's, cross them out, write 1 down, and you've got the square root of 11 left over 2. So now we're ready to break that into two separate solutions. So you've got x equals 2 plus 2 root 11 over 2. And you've got x is equal to 2 minus 2 root 11 over 2. And they can both be simplified. 2, 2, and 2 are all divisible by 2. So they become 1s. And so you end up with, and because your denominator is a 1, means the denominator disappears, and you end up with 1 plus 1 root 11. You can't simplify that any further. That's as simple as it gets. In the same way over here, 2, 2, and 2 are all divisible by 2, so they all become 1s. So you get x is equal to 1 minus 1 root 11, and you're done. So those are your two solutions. All right, in our last problem, I've already ruled out Desmos. Desmos is not going to work for us this time because the answer is a fraction, and fractions don't play nice with Desmos. So we're going to write our equation. We recognize that a is 1, b is 2, c is also 2, and then we're going to write our quadratic formula right here. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. All right, and now we're ready to start plugging and chugging. So x is equal to all over. Okay, so negative b becomes negative 2 plus or minus the square root of, becomes 2 squared minus 4 times 1 times 2 all over 2 times 1. So now we're going to continue working on that. So it becomes x equals, so this is negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 4 minus 8 over 2. And automatically I can see that it's not going to work, right? So I'll show you why. This becomes negative 2 plus or minus the square root of negative 4. This thing right here is impossible. this is impossible for our math class. And so that automatically means our line, this line, has no x-intercept. It never does cross. So basically, if I were to type this into Desmos, you would see that it never crosses. In fact, what it would probably look like is something like, here's your thing, and the parabola would look something like this. And so since it never actually crosses the x-axis, it's called undefined. And that's why we circled this. There is no x, oh, and we don't say undefined, we say there is no x-intercept. And that wraps up a very long video.